0%, 10%, 10% plus. That's the tariffs on Russia, India, and China. Russia being the aggressor, India and China being quasi-allies of the aggressor. And my question is, when the White House says something like we're going to have 100 to 500% tariffs in X amount of days put on quasi-allies, does anybody really take that seriously? Because if that's the current state of the tariffs, I would be very skeptical about that. Hi, my name is Mark Bernard. I'm a monetary economist. In this video, I want to talk about going forward, the U.S. stance towards Ukraine, what it can mean, and how Ukraine and the U.S. can work together in a positive way, which will result in victory for Ukraine and defeat of the despotism in Russia. First, I want to preempt this with, because a lot of you guys are new, you don't know me. I do a lot of entertainment on YouTube. I see YouTube primarily as a form of entertainment. That's why I'm a lot of light-hearted things. I pull rabbits out of hats. I have Sir Isaac Edison and Thomas Newton. I make mistakes like this because I'm just like non-scripted. But basically, I'm a serious academic, economist. I studied 4 years at Wake Forest University, 5 years in graduate school at Trinity, and another really almost 6 years PhD level at Gdansk University. And I do take these things seriously. However, this Ukraine-Russian war is such a serious, heavy topic. I don't want to inundate you with just pure facts and data. And, I've seen academic economists with YouTube channels and they have 0 subscribers or 1 or 2 because it's just so boring. Look, YouTube's a form of entertainment. It's family-oriented. I want to keep it light, but I also want to keep it informative. And that's why I throw in things like pulling rabbits out of the hat and do crazy different backgrounds all over the place, all over the world, is because I can sprinkle economic knowledge into the entertainment aspect. So let's begin. So the idea here is there's been pronouncements, whether it's coming from Graham or, the person in the White House is the president currently, and that it's going to be between 100 to 5%, 100% tariffs on places like China and India that are buying oil and enabling Russia in its act of aggression. I don't believe it. I don't believe it for a second, because we initially imposed very heavy tariffs. And you know me, I'm free market, free movement of labor and capital on China. And it all back down now. It's 10% plus additional things. Maybe you could average it out if you include auto and steel and certain things to 54%. India's just got a flat 10%. And, the EU, they're negotiating it's like to 15% or something. It typically sounds like, walk with a small stick and, speak very loudly. He does the opposite of what really should be done, okay? So the Chinese government and Indian government buy a tremendous amount of oil. It's the only reason Russia's still continuing its aggression. Without those purchases, 1 and 2, Russia would not be able to finance any aspect of their war effort, their aggression. North Korea, they're just like a minor player. Iran has got its own problems now. But the reality is, I don't understand why we are just not real and honest. It is China and India fueling through a quasi-alliance with Russia, the Kremlin, to this act of aggression into Europe. And we have to take that very seriously. If these threats continuously come, that we're going to increase tariffs, and yet nothing comes to fruition, and it won't, because we're already in negotiations with China. We're already in negotiations with India. They're not going to derail that. Everything the White House does is a cost-benefit analysis. It's been listening to some critics about this comparative advantage and ideas of free trade, and it's been backpedaling against its very protectionist rhetoric. And there's no way they're going to derail current negotiations because it's just not in their incentive in a cost-benefit analysis to do that. There's too much economic pressure, and elections will be coming soon around the corner, midterms. So I wonder why these statements are being made. Are they being made because they think we're naive? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Or is it a way of stalling for Russia and the Kremlin to regroup and figure out plan B, C, and D? It could be. It could be. I don't have any objective information at that level. I can tell you about microeconomics very well, and I can talk to you about, trade and species flow mechanism, balance of trade. But I'm not in the minds of these people, so I can't objectively, but it seems like anecdotal evidence seems like it's just like a stalling tactic and the negotiations are going behind the scenes. The other thing the U.S. could do, if they were serious, because if I was president, I would take a serious look at India and China. If they're being fueled, what I would do is I take the gap between the, lower than market price they get from Russia and the true market price, and I put some sort of, I don't know, on free trade, but maybe some sort of sanction or tariff to compensate, so it some free market mechanism to disincentivize India and China from buying it, legally or illegally. They should have that totally shut down. Now, the other thing the U.S. could do, I've always said, is use the sanctioned money. I think of the $300 billion in sanctions, $200 sits in Europe, and let's say $100 billion accessible in the U.S., and it has international justification, international law, historical justification. There's been numerous examples I've discussed in previous videos where they take sanctioned money and use it for the greater good, for the greater peace and of good of humanity, and that would be at least humanitarian aid, infrastructural aid, and maybe even defensive aid, true defensive, for Ukraine. And you say, well, there's a lot of political hurdles and things of that nature. So what? There's a very easy mechanism, and I discussed it before. It's called the tax system. So you don't have to get through a series of hurdles politically. You can put a special tax on it. And as we know, taxing authorities have a super extra, place in government. And it's a very quick get around. I mean, isn't that the way they got Al Capone? Okay. So I do believe that sanctioned money should be used for the greater good of humanity. And then we can work it out day two. Asking forgiveness is easier than asking permission. Okay. And the third thing they could do, we're looking at cutting things like education and science and healthcare in the U.S. And dare I say the military. But listen, if we have a $895 trillion U.S. budget in the military, about 40% of that goes to maintenance of old stuff. Okay, everything has to be maintained. If we were just, and I know the U.S. does it to a degree, but they don't do it on large scale. If we were to just unload all the old obsolete things, there would be such a huge benefit for the U.S. budget, which we could reinvest in high technology things like drones by getting rid of these old equipment from F-16s to Black Hawks to a zillion other things that we have in storage. Yes, there's going to be training, logistical retooling, et cetera, but that all could be worked out. And the cost-benefit savings of unloading, it's like cleaning your attic or garage of things that are just accumulating and taking space, but actually draining up to 40% of the U.S. defense budget. Just give it to Ukraine. I guarantee they'll know what to do with it. So there are three ideas of focusing on India and China and cutting that fuel off. Number two is the sanctions via the tax mechanism. Three, helping the U.S. defense and helping Ukraine simultaneously. I know we sold like 2 Patriot batteries indirectly. We can't be thinking about pennies. Penny rich, dollar foolish is the expression. We have to think of the peace dividend that comes from making this world a better place. When the despotism of Russia is transformed into a free democratic place and the world becomes a better place, we have to be thinking in the long term about the peace dividend that will result. And this only can result if despotism is eliminated in Russia. And I believe that despotism spreads and feeds to other countries from the Middle East to Asia. When you take one down, one despot down, directly or indirectly or whatever you phrase it, I'm not saying anything. I'm not calling for anything. I'm just saying support Ukraine. It will have a domino effect, and the other despots will see that's a road that doesn't have a winning, that's a dead-end road, and it doesn't have a winning scenario. Think about all the enemies of the past that have now embraced freedom and democracy, and how there are friends and the people live, they just want to live there, just go about their lives, discover, self-actualize. This needs to happen. I believe, and I'm not calling for it, but a dismantling of what people call Russia would be the most efficient way. And we can do this peacefully. But it has to start with some concrete practical ideas. Practical idea number one, stop that flow of oil from India and China, the two biggest supporters of that aggression. Number two, look into getting that sanctioned money. I know Garrett Kasparov has called for that many times. It would actually help the financial markets because they would remove the bad money from the good system. And number three, feng shui the military. Okay, get rid of all that obsolete equipment and do it in a positive way by giving it to those who need it for the defense of the poor, suffering souls in Ukraine. So in the long run, I want to see some real policy changes, just not talk coming out of Washington. And the good news is Ukraine's going to win no matter what, because the Russian economy, as I've maintained, is on the verge of collapse, or it's very feeble. It's a house built on straws. They have gold-tinted wallpaper, but they don't have latrines in the countryside. On that positive note, my name is Mark Biernat. I'm a monetary economist. Have a beautiful day. Thank you very much.